So I'm sure by this point you've probably seen almost everyone tell you that shifting your identity is the master key that will unlock everything for you. But what they're not telling you is that you're not going deep enough. There are 3 other layers that you need to understand before shifting your identity can actually take shape. Because the concept of shifting your identity is only working at the cognitive layer. Now, once you understand the other layers that I'm going to bring up in this video, you're going to see what you've been missing all along and why you've been trying to do the work, but nothing's actually been shifting or changing for you. So the first much deeper layer that you need to understand is your emotional layer. The thing is that emotions, when unaddressed, act like literal anchors holding down your state into a past identity. So just stick with me here because I'm really going to make this make sense to you. And by the end of this, you're really going to understand how important this actually is. So think of the emotions that you carry, such as fear, guilt, shame, all that good stuff, sadness. They arise as energy in the body or as a feeling, a painful feeling. Now, what happens is when these emotions are not dealt with, they get stored and stuck in the body. And these emotions, when they are stored and stuck in the body, from you trying to escape from them, distract from them, not look at them or deal with them, they keep you rooted at the level that these emotions are. So if you're holding like a lifetime of shame, guilt, sadness, and then you're trying to go into your cognitive layer and shift into an identity of someone who is, free and successful and, all that good stuff, then it's like literally trying to take off in a hot air balloon while it's being held down by rocks. It just isn't going to work. So you need to remove the emotional rocks and deal with this suppressed layer of emotion before your state really starts to rise. Because it isn't your identity that creates your reality. It is your overarching state, your state of being. And identity is only the cognitive layer of your state. So this can be a huge trap that people fall into, right? Because we're taught to remain positive, stay in a high state of being, always be vibing high with the sky and stuff. Everything's hunky freaking dory, everything's amazing. But if you're just ignoring the fact that you have all of this suppressed emotion and you're just trying to pretend like it isn't there, unfortunately that just doesn't work to make it go away. It just remains sitting there under the surface, running your life. Now you're trying to constantly outrun your old self or your old identity while holding on to all of the emotions of your past. So you can see how that might be a bit of a problem, right? You're holding on to all these layers from your past and trying to create a new self or a new reality. So the only way to begin to actually deal with and process this emotional layer is to allow these painful feelings to come up and be felt and allowed in your awareness. So to actually turn towards the feeling and sit with the actual feeling itself, rather than trying to do some technique or some affirmation or, some activity to make it go away or to not have to deal with it. What you will discover when you start to, hear what I'm saying and begin to do this work is that for most of you, you probably have quite a big storage of painful suppressed emotions down inside that you've been constantly carrying around, trying to create this new reality that you're trying to reach. So you can think of it like you're walking through the desert, right? And you have all these sandbags on your back. And obviously the walk through the desert, it would be so much more pleasant and so much more awesome if you weren't holding like 100 pounds of sandbags. But this is what's happening to your life when you're holding on to all these painful emotions, is you're walking through life trying to create this great life for yourself while holding 100 pounds of weight on your back. You know, it's harder, you get tired quicker, you need more water to keep going, more food, etc. It's you get the analogy. And this is a very physical thing that you can feel in yourself right now. If you just take a moment to really like open up to, okay, what is it I'm actually feeling? What is it that's actually going on here? And begin to sit with these emotions. Then by allowing the emotion to come fully up and be felt is what allows the emotion to move through. Because emotions are basically energy in movement. But what ends up happening throughout our life, because it's very normal for humans to want to avoid pain and seek pleasure, when this painful feeling comes up, we tend to put a lid on it, right? We're like, whoa, too much for right now. I don't have time to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. I'm actually at the grocery store right now, so I don't want to feel the sadness or cry. And so we kind of train ourselves to treat these emotions as a bad thing that we don't want to look at or deal with. Especially if you fell into the teaching of, remain positive at all times. It's like, all right, well now, not only are these emotions, painful, but they're actually like demonizing my experience of positivity. Now I'm actually like scared of them coming up and arising. But when you put a lid on these feelings, you are not letting the emotion complete its full process. And that's how this energy gets stuck in your body. And so you're trying to, fly high. You're trying to really reach these new heights. And yet you're holding on to all these rocks of the past. So I'm sure you can see from this why, shifting your identity isn't enough. Because unless you've first done this emotional work, or at least are on the journey of doing this emotional work, you can think however much positivity you want. You can like literally just pelt yourself with it all day long. But it is not going to address the feelings and the painful emotions that you've suppressed throughout your life. The only way you can do that is to allow them to come to the surface and be felt. And this really happens in layers, right? You'll get a wave of emotion come up, and for most of you, it'll feel like, oh God, I don't want to feel this way. Something is bad about this. Something isn't right about this. Because it doesn't feel good. It feels painful. And that's the weird thing about what I'm talking about, is that when it feels painful, it's working. It means it's coming up to move completely through. So it's a bit counterintuitive. And because I think culturally, a lot of people feel like, or treat emotions as bad, or as something that is unwanted, then it's normal to feel, guilt and shame around feeling the emotions itself. Because you're like, oh, I just want to live my life, I just want to be free. I want to, create the reality that I desire. And those are all things that are 100% available to you on the other side of this emotional suppression. But if you try just to ignore it and try to just go about it as if it's not happening, then it's never actually getting dealt with. You're constantly just putting positive band-aids over top of all this darkness that you're holding inside. And unfortunately, that just doesn't work. So a very important truth is just to realize that it's far less painful just to feel the emotion when it comes up and to completely let it move through, just to sit there and allow it to be what it is, than to suppress it. Because when you suppress it, you need to deal with it for, the rest of your life, basically, until you completely allow yourself to process this feeling. But if you just deal with it in the moment that it's happening, then you're not building up this huge layer of suppressed energy inside. So the second deeper layer that you need to understand before shifting your identity really comes into, holy crap. The second huge layer you need to understand before shifting your identity really comes into shape for you is you need to understand the layer of consciousness. Because there is a cognitive layer, and then there is a conscious or aware layer to yourself or to your being. So most strategies are only working at the cognitive level, right? They're working at control. They're working from a fear-based level of constantly trying to force experience the way they want it, instead of realizing that there's actually a deeper layer you can operate from. And what this layer is the layer of conscious awareness. So there is the cognitive level, which is your thoughts, your mind, your beliefs, which is what we're told to change. You know, our identity is involved in this as well. This is what we're constantly told to like manipulate, change, make it different than it is. And then there is a conscious aware layer that sees all of this. So all of this, your identity, your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, it's all arising within awareness. There's something that is noticing all of this happening. But what happens is we completely lose ourselves in the illusion of thought, beliefs, self-identity. We get pulled into our minds and we start following all these different thoughts about ourselves and about life around. And it becomes who we believe that we are. And then from this cognitive layer, you try to control the cognitive mind with the cognitive mind. And so you're trying to use the problem to solve the problem. Which, you know, problem plus problem equals more problems. So instead of trying to use the problem to solve the problem, step out of the problem altogether and realize that who you really are is the conscious awareness that sees all this phenomenon happening. When you realize that you're the space in which the thoughts arise, the emotions arise, the beliefs and identities arise, then you just start to see this cognitive layer as something that can be molded to your choosing. You start to see and recognize that no thought or belief that you've ever held about yourself has actually been true. The problem is that when you're only working at the cognitive layer, when you're trying to like shift beliefs, you're constantly at an opposement and at a war with your mind. Because your mind is thinking one thing based on past momentum of what you've been feeding. Like, let's say my mind believed that I suck at making videos or something. The second that I try to wrestle with this thought and tell it why it isn't true, I am immediately giving that thought reality in my experience. And I'm saying that this thought and this belief is so important that I need to wrestle with it and argue with it and tell it why actually, no, I actually am really good at making videos. I'm so good at making videos, right? But when you step out of this altogether, what it really gives you is choice. It gives you choice of which thoughts you indulge in and which thoughts you disregard. Because eventually you open up to a point where you're living life through this space of relaxed awareness, where thoughts, beliefs, and different stories about yourself, different narratives that you hold, they arise in your attention. And from this place, from this layer of conscious awareness, you can, see a false identity or a false negative belief, and you can just drop it and stop feeding it. And then you can gently guide attention towards the way you would think if you already had what you wanted. So you can see that without this conscious aware layer where you recognize that you aren't the mind and that you aren't these thoughts, can become very messy because you have misidentified as the cognitive layer. And then from this identity, you're trying to change the cognitive layer. But you're so identified with it that by trying to change an old belief that you've been believing in your entire life, you're basically saying that part of who I thought I was or part of my identity was always wrong. And that can be a very destabilizing thing to do, and the mind can have a lot of resistance to that. So really the deeper layer of shifting identity is shifting from the identity of the mind, of all these thoughts, beliefs, stories, to shifting to the identity of the open space of awareness. You start to identify with this open, aware space. And this open, aware space is far more intelligent and far more powerful than the cognitive layer of your mind will ever be. So when you understand these deeper layers, it's much easier to mold your identity into the direction that you want. But if you ignore these deeper layers and you just work at the cognitive level to, oh, no, I'm rich, I'm successful, I'm a disciplined person, then you're missing a huge, huge layer of what's actually controlling your experience underneath the surface. And like I said, you're trying to solve a problem with a problem. More problems, or yeah, whatever. Anyway, hope this helped.